In this video, I'm going to tell you about priming and painting on the sprue and why it's not a very good idea. Just a quick note, the furnace is not working here in the studio, so it's about 52 degrees. And I can't see my breath yet, but we're getting there. So this, like many of my videos, is based off of a question that was asked of me by a kind of a newer hobbyist. It was actually during the Las Vegas Open in Vegas, strangely enough, Las Vegas, this last weekend where I was at. And so the person was asking me, so should I be painting and priming my models on the sprue? Because I've heard people talk about that. I haven't tried it that way. Is it faster? Is it better? Anything along those lines. So for those of you who've not heard about this before, the concept is this. You take your sprue, this is the sprue, and it works obviously best for plastic models, which come on sprues. Metal models generally don't. Resin models, for the most part, don't. If you look at the Star Wars Legion, you know, the Stormtroopers and the Rebels, they don't come on sprues either, except for now the new ones with the little battle droids, they come on sprues. They're very skinny, it kind of makes sense. But most of our GW models, weird miniatures like Weird Games is the name of the company, Malifaux, like most any kind of hardcore, hard plastic models come on this sprue, this frame, and you have to cut them off so you can put them together and all that stuff. But there are people out there who find it useful to prime the models themselves right here on the sprue before they cut them off, and even paint before they cut them off. Now this is my opinion, but it is based off of years of painting and modeling and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully it will be helpful to you, my wisdom, for lack of a better term, and why this is not a great idea, specifically for beginners. I don't know if it's a great idea for anybody, honestly, but specifically for beginners. The concept is that you're going to spray, whether it's a rattle can or airbrush or whatever, to put your primer on onto the models, and then you are going to, in some situations, even start painting directly here. Now, the benefit, allegedly, is that, well, you've got this big honking thing to hold on to, so it's very easy to get in there and paint and bring a brush along, but you can sit there and paint and get in there. And that's technically true, but it's the next step that kind of throws all your hard work into the wood chipper, and that is now having to cut all these pieces off. So you take your clippers generally, and then you clip off a piece. And when you do that, you've painted all around where the little nubbin is attached to whatever it is, whether it's a guy's arm holding a chainsword or it's a head or whatever. And now you're clipping that part away, which means you are, well, first of all, there was no paint there anyway because there was no there to get paint on. Just a second ago, those two pieces were one. So you're clipping that away, now you've got this unpainted spot. Plus, you're also probably scraping a good amount of paint around the little nubbin. I don't know if that's a technical term or not. And now you have to kind of go back and repaint those. Now, in some situations, they put the nubbin in a place where it's not very visible. Like a lot of times on heads, on like especially Games Workshop style models, the heads are normally, the nubbin thing is attached on the bottom. And that's where you're going to glue it onto the body, so it doesn't really matter. But, arms, I'm seeing here, elbows, these legs, it's the bottoms of the feet and the torso top, or the part where you would add the torso. So again, that's not a problem. But in a lot of situations, the part where you have to cut off is the part that you're going to then have to go back and try to take like something like one of these emery boards and sand to make it so that the clipping area where the nubbin is no longer really super visible. And as soon as you start rubbing this on the model, guess what? There goes your paint and your primer. In general, I also find it very difficult to try to get mold lines off. I generally use an X-Acto blade. There's lots of other different ways to do it, but it generally takes some scraping to get mold lines off. And it's kind of difficult to get the mold lines off when you're using a big sprue like this. There's a bunch of different reasons. One of the biggest reasons is you have to be very methodical if you're going to go through and remember, I did all of the legs already on this sprue. I did all of the left arms already on this sprue. I did all of the heads already on this sprue. Because if you don't, you might cut it off and then you have, there's just, the other thing too is you don't in most situations have to use all the parts on the sprue. So trying to keep track of which ones are which and which ones you're going to use. The idea of sitting down and building models is that you go through this sprue, you grab the parts that you need, clip them, sand them, smooth them, flash mold lines, all that jazz, and then glue them together. Or in some situations, you glue them partially together. The concept behind this whole thing is kind of like sub-assemblies gone awry. Now, for some of you, sub-assemblies, what that means is when you're painting a model, you don't put it all the way together because it makes it a little easier to paint. If this vampire's got a big honking cape, it's hard to paint up the backside, the inside of the cape where his back is, because you can't get a brush in there very easily. So if you keep the cape off and then paint the inside of the cape and then glue it on later, that's not a bad idea, but you probably build the rest of the vampire or whatever. I did a video about sub-assemblies and the importance in trying to paint in some situations with sub-assemblies. Pachow. This is like that, like I said, to the nth degree, because everything is completely unassembled when you're working on the, sprue. But there is a much more modern problem with the whole priming and painting on the sprue. Now, this is a Scout sprue from, has it got a date on it? 2005. I don't know that this sprue has been updated. You still, if you're buying Scouts today, they're going to look like this. And there are some big holes here. Admittedly, this is a used sprue, but there are some, like right here in this spot here with the bolter and the shotgun and the arm, nothing has been clipped in there yet. I can still stick my index finger partially through a lot of these holes, okay? Up here, there was just 2 sets of legs right next to each other, and I can fit a whole finger straight through there. This is the Gene Stealer Cults sprue that has come out, what's the date on it? Where's the date? It's relatively recent, 2016. Do you see a difference between these two sprues? There is a big one, and that's that you can see part of my face through this sprue, and you can't really see my face through this sprue. This sprue, being a newer sprue, is very computer-aided design. They have used computers to figure out the best way to get as much stuff into one piece of sprue as they could into this. So this is, let me see, there were I think there were 5 Scout parts on this giant sprue. There are 5 different Gene Stealer Cultists in this sprue. These 2 pieces of plastic here builds you 10 guys, and you have a ton of parts left over. And it's because the computer was able to basically sort of Tetris all these parts together. There's just a lot of work. And here's the issue. When you try to go through with this sprue and try to clean up your mold lines, good luck. Honestly, in many situations, I find it a little hard to even clip the parts off of these types of sprues because they are so very, very tightly packed. So if you're going to try to prime and paint models on the new sprues that we're getting from GW, the new Sisters of Battle, their sprues look just like this, just absolutely Tetris together. The tolerances, which is the word I was searching before, they are very tight, and it is because of all the math and the science that the computers can do to make this work. This is a good reason these days to not try to paint and prime on the sprue. However, for me, one of the biggest issues for not wanting to paint and prime, I not even want to prime. If you just prime the models, then at least when you clip them off, you have to go back and touch up all the primer in the certain spots when you glue it all together, and then you might start painting. But for the idea that you're going to both prime and then paint on the sprue, in my mind, that's crazy, because when I put a model together and it's all completely together, I now understand where the top is, where the bottom is, where the light's coming from, all that kind of stuff. Especially as a beginner, looking at this and trying to figure out where the light's supposed to be coming from on each one of these different pieces on here is super difficult. But when you take all the pieces that you need to make up a single figure and you put it all together, glue it all together, make sure all of the gaps are nice and closed, you now have a great looking model. And now once you've primed it and it's time to start painting, you can start looking at it and say, okay, well, the top of the head, obviously the top of the head is relatively simple to figure out, but if you pose the head, because this is kind of a multi-pose kit, so a certain way, and you want the light to be coming a certain way, when you start getting a little fancier with your paint, it's really, really hard to keep track of all that on this sprue. The way that most of the companies are going now, because they can use a less amount of plastic, less amount of shipping, the box that something like this comes in comparison to something like this is considerably cheaper when you go with the smaller size. this is the way of the world. This is the way things are going. So trying to figure out a way to, I guess, maybe save time. I've never quite frankly understood what the purpose of priming and painting on the sprue was. I guess maybe you've got a bigger handle to hold on to things, but in this day and age, we've got plenty of different options for holding on to our models. I used to use poster putty in a pill bottle. Now I use those little GW pinchy handles, but there's plenty of 3D printed things out there, all kinds of stuff. So if you're worried about being able to hold the model properly while you're working on it, that's the way to go. Just trying to hold this thing to try to paint, like I can't imagine trying to get a brush in between a lot of these spots so that I can make sure I've got everything covered. It's just not a great idea, especially in today's modern, CAD, computer-aided design situation. Back in these days, maybe not a terrible idea. Now, not so good. So if you're new to the hobby and you keep hearing this term about painting on the sprue and priming on the sprue and things like that, I would tell you to not go down that road. Again, this is my opinion. I'd tell you not to, because when you put the models together and you want to do the priming thing where you start out and you prime a dark color and then you spritz from above with a light color, what they call zenithal highlighting, you can't do that at all on something like this. The models have to be put together so that when you spray from the top down, then the lighter paint hits them in the right spots. That particular thing is not impossible this way, just incredibly, incredibly difficult. So now's the time when those of you who still prime and paint on the sprue, let me know in the comments below about why I'm wrong and why you do it. If there's a really great reason for it, I'd love to hear it. So put that in the comments. But especially in the day and age now of this versus this, I think it's really important to understand that it's not just an efficiency issue. It's an access issue, being able to get at all parts of the model, understanding that the gaps, if you paint and you get it in spots that the paint's not supposed to be, now when you try to press the model together and glue it together, you may have gaps that you didn't want and you can't get rid of them very easily at that point down the road. Having to go back and repaint all the parts that you've clipped away anyway and doing it, it doesn't seem like it's an efficiency issue. Like I said, if it's a holding issue, we've got plenty of things to hold on to our models these days. It's just an older technique that some people used to use, and if you're new to the hobby, I'd tell you to not give it a try. But if there's a good reason, I'd love to hear it down in the comments below. And until we get a good one, I would tell you to build your models, then prime them, and then paint them.